Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, Innistrad Midnight Hunt spoiler season continues on, and we are getting some really exciting cards today, including what might be a brand new Blasphemous Act. So if you haven't seen my episode on Wipe Out the Horde, make sure you check that one out. Also from this morning, an incredibly strange and incredibly broken commander with an incredibly weird name. Old Stick Fingers. Yeah, I never thought I would see a card with that name, but here we are. But when it comes to weird, perhaps the strangest thing of all time in Magic might just be this new card. I mean, even just from the title and the thumbnail, you can see that I said that you can beat your opponents with a house. Yeah, you didn't mishear me or misread that. You can beat your opponents with this house. So how in the world are we going to demolish opponents with a house? Well, let's jump into it to find out. So first up, this card's name is actually Hostel, which is just absolutely hilarious. Regardless, the Hostel is a land that can tap for a colorless, and by paying 1 and tapping it, you sacrifice a creature. When you do that, you get a soul counter on Hostel. Again, fantastic name. Then if there are 3 or more soul counters on it, remove those counters, transform it, then untap it, activate only as a sorcery. So first up, although this does just tap for a colorless, it does come into play untapped, which is huge. So while this might not help us fix our mana, it doesn't slow us down. Now to sacrifice a creature with it, we do have to pay mana, but 1 mana isn't all that bad, though it kind of like is 2 mana because we are tapping the land as well. Regardless, not a ton of mana for a sack outlet on a land. Though do keep in mind that unfortunately we can only activate this at sorcery speed, which is noteworthy. But still, there are plenty of decks out there that do want sack outlet lands, and we'll talk about those here in a bit. Regardless, once we sacrifice 3 creatures and get 3 soul counters on this, those counters go away and we transform and untap this card. And Hostel turns into Creeping In, which now that I say that out loud, that's also kind of a funny play on words, like you're creeping into somewhere. I wonder if that's got to be intentional, right? Anyways, Creeping In is a 3/7 horror construct. It has, whenever it attacks, you may exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of creature cards exiled with Creeping In. On top of that, by paying 4 mana, Creeping In phases out. So first up, I absolutely love the design of this card. It is incredibly flavorful, but in the right deck, it can also be very effective as well. Again, there are plenty of decks out there that do want to sacrifice creatures, and having an extra sack outlet on a land can be huge. And then again, on top of that, once this does transform into a creature, you can utilize those creature cards that you sacrifice with it. The more that this sticks around in attacks and the more creatures that you exile with it, the more effective those attacks become. So this can help you drain your opponents and gain some life throughout the game. On top of that, a creature with phasing can be very difficult for your opponents to deal with. That being said, 4 mana can be a bit steep. But say that you've gotten some attacks in already with this and you've drained your opponents for 5 or 6, well then maybe it's going to be worth keeping some mana up to keep this around. Again, with that phasing, you can dodge board wipes and pretty much everything else. So at a certain point, this can become a finisher. And again, beating your opponents with a house is absolutely hilarious and definitely worth doing. Regardless, let's move on and talk about some comparable cards to this one, and there's even a comparable card from a recent trip to Innistrad. So, like I said, the first comparable card that I'm going to bring up actually came from Shadows over Innistrad with Westvale Abbey. Westvale Abbey is also a land that taps for a colorless, and it has pay 5 and tap it, pay 1 life, put a 1/1 white and black human cleric creature token onto the battlefield. And then by paying 5 and a black and tapping it, you can sacrifice 5 creatures and transform Westvale Abbey, then untap it. It transforms into Ormondal Profane Prince, a 9/7 demon with flying, lifelink, indestructible, and haste. So obviously there are some differences between our Hostel and Westvale Abbey. First up, to get to Ormondal, you can actually make creatures, though it is quite spendy to do so, being 5 mana, tapping it, and paying 1 life. And it's kind of like more of a mass sack outlet than a repeatable one, because again, you have to sacrifice 5 creatures at once rather than 1 at a time. But that payoff is quite nice, with Ormondal being again a 9/7 flying, lifelink, indestructible, hasty demon. So yeah, that's most definitely more immediately threatening than our creeping in. Now, when I actually think about Hostel, I kind of see it as a mix of being like a Westvale Abbey, but also being more so kind of like a High Market. High Market is a land that taps for a colorless, and you can tap it to sacrifice a creature to gain 1 life. So this is actually a repeatable sacrifice outlet that is actually free, or again, somewhat free because you are utilizing the land to do so. That's more along the lines of Hostel, which again is a repeatable sacrifice outlet, though I guess there is a limit to that since you can only do it really 3 times. Now, the benefit from High Market is a small one, but one that can be impactful for some decks, gaining you 1 life. Though if I had to venture a guess, I would say that most decks don't really care all that much about that 1 life gain, they're just really caring about having that sacrifice outlet on a land. So again, Hostel can most definitely help in that regard for a bit. And also, when it comes to decks that are running High Market and ones that aren't really caring too much about that life gain, they're probably going to be taking a look at Hostel as well. Again, another potential sack outlet on a land can be a very impactful thing for these kinds of decks. So now that we've talked about some comparable cards, let's talk about some commanders that might want to be considering this card. First up, how about Savrak, Queen of the Golgari? She has, whenever you sacrifice a black creature, you may pay 2 life. If you do, each other player sacrifices a creature. And whenever you sacrifice a green creature, you may gain 2 life. A repeatable edict effect like this one can be incredibly powerful. So another land sacrifice outlet like Hostel could definitely be effective in this kind of a deck. But now let's move on to Elenda the Duskgroves. Elenda is a 1/1 vampire knight with lifelink that has, whenever their creature dies, put a ++1 counter on Elenda the Duskgroves. And when she dies, you create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is Elenda's power. So Elenda wants a lot of creatures to die, including yours and your opponent's. So obviously sacrificing your own creatures can benefit her in that way. And then when you're ready to get a ton of vampires with lifelink, well, just sacrifice Elenda. Next up, a commander that absolutely loves sacrificing, well, basically anything with a death trigger, there's Teysa Karlov. Teysa has, if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So yeah, Teysa is essentially the Death Harmonicon commander. And having a sacrifice outlet on a land can come in handy. Next up, how about Joffrey Ghostforge? Joffrey says, spirits you control get +1/+1 and have trample and haste. And whenever another non-token creature you control dies, exile it. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a spirit next to its other types, and it has, when this creature leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to your graveyard. Basically, when one of your non-token creatures dies, you get a token copy of it, and then when that token dies, you get the non-token creature back in your graveyard. So this commander can be fantastic at abusing things like ETB triggers on creatures, so yeah, have fun sacrificing those. And I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, but I'll just mention it here for pretty much all these too. Obviously, once it flips over to creeping in, you can utilize those creatures that you sacrifice to drain your opponents. Next up, let's talk about Shirei, Shizo's Caretaker. Shirei has, whenever a creature with power 1 or less is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may return that card to the battlefield at the beginning of your next end step if Shirei, Shizo's Caretaker is still on the battlefield. So basically, if you sacrifice a creature that's very, very small, it's going to be coming back. And of course, you're going to have plenty of benefits for sacrificing that creature, whether that's actually on the creature or something else. But now let's move on and talk about Atla Palani Nest Tender. Atla Palani has pay 2 and tap, create a 0/1 green egg creature token with Defender. And then whenever an egg you control dies, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card, put that card on the battlefield, and you rest the bottom of your library in a random order. So, make eggs, sack eggs, get bigger creatures. Speaking of which, there's Min, Wily Illusionist. Min has, whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 blue illusion creature token with, this creature gets +1/+0 for each other illusion you control. On top of that, whenever illusion you control dies, you may put a permanent card with mana value less than or equal to that creature's power from your hand onto the battlefield. Basically, make a bunch of illusions, sacrifice some of them, and get some big things in play. Next up though, there's Innistrad Master Breeder. Innistrad has, whenever you cast a creature spell, put X/1/1 black throw creature tokens onto the battlefield where X that spell's converted mana cost. And then when you've got 7 or more thralls, you've got to sacrifice Innistrad Master Breeder. So yeah, you can actually help Innistrad out by sacrificing some of those thralls so Endrick doesn't just, die from you having too many thralls. Next up though, let's talk about a commander that actually wants to be sacrificed itself, like Kakusho. Kakusho the Evening Star says whenever it dies, each opponent loses 5 life, you gain life of your life lost this way. So obviously by getting this commander out again and again and again and sacrificing it again and again and again, you can drain your opponents out. And next up we actually have another commander that actually wants to be taken out with Homura, Human Ascendant. Unfortunately it can't block, but again that's what sacrifice outlets are for, and when it's put into a graveyard from play, return to play flipped. And when it flips, it says creatures you control get +2/+2 and half flying and pay a red. This creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Next up though, thank you Eddie for this suggestion, how about a theft commander like Yosova Dragonclaw? She has, at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay 1 Is It? If you do, gain control of target creature an opponent controls with power less than Yosova Dragonclaw's power until end of turn, untap that creature, gains haste until end of turn. Basically, steal an opponent's creature and never get it back thanks to your sacrifice land. And finally, one other one I just want to point out would be Yawgmoth Reimposition. Now, Yawgmoth is already a sacrifice outlet itself. It has pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature, put a -1/-1 counter up to 1 target creature, and draw a card. But if you really want to utilize Hostel, you just have to do so once, and then you can flip it pretty quickly if you actually have a deck that's built around the Proliferate effect. Because Yawgmoth also has pay black, discard a card, Proliferate. So a more casual Yawgmoth deck out there, if that such thing exists, might want to utilize Hostel just for this fun effect. Keep in mind, you will have to sacrifice a second creature though to get that transform trigger though. But now as this episode is coming to a close, it's time for me to wrap things up and give you my final thoughts on Hostel, and I still can't get over that amazing name. So I definitely think there are going to be a good amount of decks out there considering this card just for the fact that it is a sacrifice land that's decently cheap. That being said, it can only be done at sorcery speed, which might be a deal breaker for certain decks. Regardless, it's a fun card and I love the design, and if you've always wanted to demolish your opponents with a house, go for it. And with that, the show has come to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thank you again and have a good one.